So you're here because you want to go beyond the headlines, right? To really get a handle on the big forces shaping things.
Yeah, looking for that deepy dive, not just the quick take.
Exactly. So today we're getting straight into a book that promises just that. It's Terror, Inc., The Business of Hate and Animosity by Albert Hottie.
And what hits you right away with Hadi's book, I think, is how personal it feels. It's not some dry academic thing.
No, definitely not.
He says right up front, this came from years, literally years, in war zones, seeing horrific suffering and just asking again and again, why? Why does this keep happening?
Right. It's a perspective forged in, well, in the middle of intense conflict. And from seeing that devastation up close, he develops this really powerful and honestly quite disturbing idea
Which is?
that terrorism isn't just, random outbursts of hate. He argues it's deliberate, it's organized, and like the title says pretty bluntly, it's profitable, it's a business.
Yeah. And our goal here for you listening is really to unpack that argument. We want to shift from thinking about terrorism as just irrational acts.
Which is often how it's portrayed.
Exactly. And explore Hadi's view that it actually operates like a sophisticated, albeit incredibly brutal, business. He really lays out how chasing profit becomes this powerful driver for violence, almost separate from the original ideology sometimes. It's not just about belief anymore, it's about the bottom line.
And the author, Albert Hottie, he brings some serious credentials to this. We're talking over 25 years of direct, first-hand experience in war zones.
Yeah, his focus is specifically counterterrorism, terrorist propaganda,
Right.
the messaging and these violent extremist ideologies.
He's worked with U.S. interagency groups, even led efforts directly countering propaganda from groups like ISIS. So this isn't theory from an armchair. This is grounded in decades of real-world practical work.
And you feel that in the writing. It's unflinching. He calls terrorists criminals, murderers. He doesn't romanticize the freedom fighter idea at all.
No, he really dismantles that, shows how groups manipulate language to seem legitimate.
He pulls no punches. And look, his previous book, Shadow Soldiers, about Iran's proxy strategy, was a bestseller. That tells you something about how relevant his insights are.
Okay, so let's really dig into this central idea, terrorism as a business. The book argues we need to fundamentally shift how we see these acts not as isolated events, but as part of a systematic industry. What's the core of that argument?
Well, Hadi describes this kind of evolution. Maybe historically you saw terror acts as like sporadic things driven purely by belief.
Right.
But Terror, Inc. shows how it's morphed into this highly organized machine. It's a complex web where money, politics, and ideology are all tangled up. It's about understanding the actual infrastructure, the funding, the recruitment pipelines, the logistics that keeps these groups going.
And it's not just these non-state groups acting alone, is it? The book also talks about how terrorism can be a tool in bigger power plays, maybe even involving governments.
Precisely. And this connects to a wider, more unsettling point Hadi makes. He explores how some nations might, put on a face of being liberators or forces for stability.
While actually doing the opposite.
While actually behind the scenes, they could be fueling chaos for their own political or economic reasons. He talks about governments using proxy groups, clandestine operations, basically creating external enemies to rally support at home or distract from their own issues.
So manufacturing fear, essentially, for political gain. Now, looking at how these groups operate today, technology seems unavoidable.
Oh, absolutely. The book really highlights how modern extremist groups are incredibly savvy at blending old-school violence with new tech.
How so?
They're using digital platforms for everything. Recruitment, radicalization, sure, but also sophisticated cyber stuff, hitting infrastructure, stealing data, spreading disinformation, and, crucially, moving money, laundering illicit funds online. It's this dangerous mix of, raw brutality and high-tech methods.
And behind the strategies and the tech, there are always people. The book looks at the human cost, the pathways into radicalization, what makes someone vulnerable, what do these groups exploit.
Yeah, this brings up the really human side of it. Hadi points out that the path to extremism often starts with things like deep personal loss or social isolation, maybe a burning sense of injustice.
Right, real grievances.
Real grievances. And what's chilling is how these groups then weaponize that vulnerability. They offer a twisted kind of belonging, a purpose, a story that seems to explain everything and offers a path forward, even if that path is total destruction.
So they prey on that alienation, offering a warped sense of community. The book also talks about psychological warfare. How is terrorism deliberately designed to create chaos and fear way beyond the actual violence?
Well, the key here is the calculated use of propaganda. Terrorist leaders get it widespread fear, can break down society, erode trust in institutions.
Magnifying the impact.
Exactly. By blasting their violent acts across digital media, one attack can have this huge psychological ripple effect. It destabilizes regions, and it can even provoke governments into overreacting, which sometimes plays right into the terrorists' hands.
And then there's the money, the economics of it all. It's kind of horrifying to think about how these groups actually fund themselves.
Hadi gives a really detailed and, unsettling look at how diverse their funding is. It's often illegal stuff.
Like what?
Well, everything from traditional crime, like smuggling, extortion, moving into drug trafficking, cybercrime, and importantly, state sponsorship is often in the mix too.
So government's funding them.
Sometimes, yes. And the book stresses how adaptable and resilient these financial networks are. They're often woven into the legitimate global economy in complex ways.
Can you give some more specific examples from the book? How do they actually make money day to day?
Sure. What's disturbing is just how broad it is. Hadi talks about arms trafficking, obviously, money laundering, often using informal systems like Hawala, these trust-based money transfer networks.
Right. Hard to track.
Very hard. Then there's sex trafficking, migrant smuggling, kidnapping for ransom, all major income streams. He even points out how sometimes seemingly legitimate charities or religious fronts can be used to channel funds. It's insidious.
And we touched on state-sponsored terrorism. The book seems to really emphasize how some countries might wear this mask of liberation while actually fueling the fire. How does that work?
Yeah, that's a really central part of Hadi's analysis. He argues certain nations, while they might publicly say they support freedom movements or whatever, are actually manipulating these groups to push their own strategic agendas, politically and economically. They hide their direct hand in it, deliberately creating instability where it serves them. It's a cynical game, really.
Using chaos as a tool. Shifting gears slightly, the book talks about the backbone of these organizations, the people who aren't necessarily the face on the news. Who are they?
Hadi really makes the point that it's not just the figureheads you see. There's this whole network of hidden architects, people working behind the scenes.
Do what?
They're the ones crucial for actually building and sustaining the groups. Recruitment specialists, financial managers, propaganda writers and distributors, logistics people, all the essential cogs in the machine that keep the terror enterprise running.
And how do they find people willing to become killers? The book mentions the ideal candidate. What are they looking for? What methods do they use?
Well, what Hadi outlines is this really systematic process. It's identification, recruitment, and then brainwashing. They often target people feeling isolated, facing economic hardship, or holding deep grudges or feelings of injustice.
Okay.
Then they use pretty sophisticated psychological conditioning, indoctrination, to basically reshape their worldview and turn them into weapons.
Sounds disturbingly methodical. And a key part of that conditioning, the book says, is constructing this idea of the enemy.
Exactly. Hadi analyzes how terrorist propaganda deliberately crafts this concept of the enemy. It's about dehumanizing the target group.
Making them other.
Completely other, stripping away empathy. It makes it psychologically much easier for recruits to commit brutal acts. That dehumanization is a fundamental step on the road to radical violence.
The book doesn't just diagnose the problem, though, right? It also talks about addressing root causes. What's Hadi's take on how we actually combat this long term?
What's really important from the book here is the idea that just fighting militarily or using security forces, well, it's not enough on its own.
Right. It can feel like whack-a-mole sometimes.
It can. Hadi really stresses the need to tackle the underlying issues, things like socioeconomic inequality, political oppression, lack of education. These create the conditions where extremist ideas can actually find fertile ground and spread.
So you have to address the grievances, too.
Yes, he spends a lot of time arguing that just fighting the terrorists themselves isn't the whole answer. Unless you address the drivers, the poverty, the disenfranchisement, the educational gaps, you're basically just treating symptoms, not the disease itself.
So it needs a much broader strategy. Addressing the immediate danger, but also those deeper societal problems. Okay, bringing this together then, this deep dive into Terror, Inc. paints a picture of terrorism that's way more complex, more calculated, maybe more insidious than we often think.
That sums it up well. The book really exposes it as this sophisticated, brutal business model operating globally. The takeaways are pretty stark, I think. Terrorism isn't random hate. It's often deliberate, organized.
Driven significantly by money.
Driven by money, used as a political tool, and Yeah, at the absolute heart of it is this tragic human cost, fueled by some very sophisticated radicalization tactics.
So thinking about all these deep roots in economics and politics that Hadi lays out, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? A question for you listening. Given this complex web Hadi describes, what kind of innovative, maybe even unconventional strategies might actually work to dismantle these terror businesses?
Yeah, maybe thinking beyond just military or police actions.
Right. Could it be about disrupting those financial networks in completely new ways? Or maybe tackling those underlying grievances with truly systemic changes? It forces you to think about how interlinked all these factors really are.
It definitely pushes you to think outside the standard security box. Considering the economic and political angles, Hadi emphasizes what new leverage points might exist there.
A lot to chew on, for sure. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive today. We really hope you'll continue exploring these kinds of critical topics.